Welcome to First Things First. I'm Brooke and my pronouns are she and her.
I'm Matty Mills, my pronouns are he and him, and before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which we record, and today, for me, that's the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation.
And for me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Let's get into it.
So, I have to give a little bit of a shout out to a recent film that I watched, which actually was like looking at your life through, or like a bird's eye view of your life, or looking in the mirror. It was such a reflection of my own childhood that it was kind of creepy and spooky in a way.
Okay.
Obviously different experiences, but the general vibe and the feeling of it was so, one, nostalgic, two, so relatable and connection and powerful that it just, it makes me so inspired to create more films like this.
Okay, what was the film?
So it's called Like My Brother, and it's basically a story of three girls, Jess, Frida and Rena, who are pretty talented AFL players. They play, they're from the Tiwi Islands, and they're wanting to get drafted to the AFLW. And they have to travel a long way from home to do that. And luckily they get picked up with the Bombers, Bombers Scout, so Essendon Bombers.
Yep.
And they get to sort of train and test and play a VFL season with the Bombers and, move away from home. But one of the common themes that I guess felt in this film, and I guess is a common theme for our lives, is the sorry business and grief aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That is
it
something
really hits our communities, hey?
Totally. It's so sad to say this, but it's the time where we connect the most as mob. Like, it feels like whenever I'm around family, it's always for sorry business, you know? There's not that many weddings that I can say that I've been to where I've connected with my family. It's more like funerals.
That's, I guess, why I was so excited to become a marriage celebrant, which I will be still, but it's just taking me a bit of time because I got so much other shit going on.
Totally.
But I want to, do those, cultural ceremonies where it's like a wedding. I want us to have more ceremonies that were to celebrate love and care and consideration rather than death and grief and sadness and fucking loss. Like, I'm over that. But it's just a thing that we have to live with, isn't it, in our lives. And every time I sort of talk about my life, people say, wow, like, you really have lost a lot of people. Yeah. And I'm so desensitized to that word or even the feeling because I'm like, I have, but I don't know. Just get on with life, really.
That's a tough person. I think that somebody who has lost direct family members like that at such a young age, I feel like you do grow like a tough exterior. Yeah. And it's a weird thing because I think what people would necessarily expect from somebody who's gone through so much trauma at such a young age is a broken person and somebody who crumbles easily or is visibly affected by that grief and trauma all the time. Yeah. But it's like the thing about the human experience is that you do find ways to get through stuff and you find ways to cope.
Yeah, I agree.
How do you think, like, I know that you've gone through a lot in your life when it comes to loss. Like, what are your coping mechanisms? How do you get through your grief?
Well, grief is a lot like just life in general. And I think, life moments go up and down and you can't always have good days. Like, you have to have shitty days to appreciate the good ones. You could have good days to appreciate why the shitty ones exist. And I think grief is a bit similar to that. I think you kind of it might not hit you in that moment of losing someone. It might come later. It might. And, there's this experience of grief is that there are 7 parts of it. And, they sort of can come at any time. They're not, in level of order, I guess. One of the first things is usually shock, and that could come later. Anger, denial, sadness.
Has been a big one for me.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, how I've dealt with it is when I was much younger, I didn't realize that I had suppressed some of it.
Yeah.
And then some of it I, made it a motivation in a way. So, and then some of it I was fucking angry at, and I experienced a lot of anger. So my coping mechanisms haven't always been the most healthy, but because I'm in such a healthy mindset now, and I can look back at those experiences and look how I am now, I can see what I did then was only in my capacity. And I was a kid, and I just had to sort of get on and deal with it. And now I'm sort of dealing with the effects. But grief affects me every day, I guess, in some way. I have moments of this, sad moments where I feel really joyful and so happy that I'm like, wow, oh my God, I can't believe I just achieved that. And this is such a great moment. And then I'll have this rush of sadness because of the feeling that my mum doesn't get to experience this with me. And I'll feel sad. Even though I'm feeling so happy, I'll feel this hint of sadness because she doesn't get to dwell and live in this with me. And I guess that's just living with grief, right? That's just living with that. And it affects you at different points in your life. What about you? I guess you've also, have lost so many family members, your brother recently more so. And do you feel like as an adult you've been able to learn to deal with it better, or do you think you're still kind of just going through the waves of it all?
I just remember having such a weird experience with grief when I was young. I was told that my dad had died.
Yes.
So I grew up with the belief and the grief of somebody who that I believed was dead and gone. And I remember how sad that was for me as a young kid, and how empty I felt, thinking that I would never get to meet my dad or experience life with a dad. And then all of a sudden, that all turned in on itself, and it was false.
Yeah,
and it's like all that grief that I experienced as a kid, and the lies and the trauma that came with that, the emptiness that came with that, it felt like it was all for nothing. Like, who would put someone through that? Then, that sort of, I had this weird moment where when I met my dad when I was in care for the first time, it was the weirdest feeling of like, I was elated. Like it was like an out-of-body experience of seeing this man and having this interaction that was just never on the cards. And I think that healed like a lot of that grief really quickly.
Yeah.
The experience of getting to know my dad healed a lot of that loss and that disconnectedness when I was a young kid. But then getting older and experiencing grief, I think what I've realized is I try and experience joy a lot when it comes to my life.
Yeah.
and I think that when
that's
it comes
healing, right?
Yeah. And that's why I do what I do. Like, I really believe that I have a job that I experience joy in.
Yeah.
And so if I
you don't want to be dwelling in the mud, right?
It's the counterattack to what I've been given, the cards I've been given.
Yes.
I have to produce joy in my life, and that's my job. I think I get so much joy out of being able to live out my dream in my career that it's like the counter action to what cards I was dealt. It's heavy, not just on me, but I see it when I go home with my family. Like, there's a lot of grief, especially recently around my brother, how I've seen grief affect someone really tough is my dad.
Yeah.
My dad was a really strong, determined, loving, kind man. And grief has made him deeply depressed, bedridden, debilitating. Grief has been debilitating to him, to the point where he's ended up in hospital for weeks on end because of grief. And I feel like if you don't have the coping mechanisms, or if you don't have the resources or people around you to support you and take a bit of that weight off,
you just go by day, kind of holding that and carrying it.
And it holds you down.
Yeah.
I think that there are so many of our communities that are drowning in grief.
Yeah.
I think about my community back home of Coldale. Just being in that place, I feel it.
I remember someone telling me that grief is like having a rock in your pocket, and some days you feel it and some days you might not notice it. and sometimes it feels heavier and some days it feels lighter. And I think that's a great sort of analogy of how I sort of see grief, is that in the moments when you feel really strong and you're feeling really empowered and you're feeling liberated, you're feeling supported and loved by people around you, the rock doesn't feel so heavy. The thing is, it actually never really goes away.
Yeah.
It's not like this thing like, oh, I'm healed and I'm grieved.
No.
It's like you've lost something. You've lost a bit of you. And I think that's what I realized when I was younger, is that I felt like I was always trying to strive to be back to the same person that I was before something happened. And I was striving to get back to that. But that's kind of what grief does. Unfortunately, I feel when you lose someone, you do lose a little bit of a part of yourself. And you have to acknowledge that it doesn't change you or like make you different or any way, but it does affect you. And you're not always going to be the same person. It's such a complex issue, grief, but we don't talk about it a lot.
I feel like it's a universal experience. We all experience it. I think that in our community we experience it a lot because of the disadvantage that we face. And I think that colonisation has massively contributed to that disadvantage. So there's a lot of issues within our community that grief stems from. I
agree.
A loss of disconnection, when that isn't just about people, but that's about land, environment, culture.
Yeah.
I think you become lost, and I think that there's this sense of trying to find something that you can hold on to or belonging, and grief is something that sometimes can deny you from that,
It does, yeah. And then if you don't acknowledge it.
When you acknowledge it, there is a bit of pressure that is relieved. It's like, oh, okay, because you're seeing it for what it is. Yes, it has power in the sense that it can affect you in how you operate. But if you acknowledge it, it's like when you have a list of things to do and they're all in your head and you're like, oh, I feel overwhelmed. As soon as you write them down on a piece of paper,
immediately better.
All of a sudden, it's gone from here to here, and there's a weight that's been lifted, and you feel like, oh, that is achievable. I know exactly what I need to do to get that done.
Well, okay, when you think of your grief, like so when I think of grief and the word grief, and I think, oh, yeah, is my sister comes up a lot. And I think it's because I felt like losing my sister, when it's a sibling, you're so close. And my sister is always the feeling that when I'm not feeling well, I know that I'm still grieving that because it's my most recent.
Yeah.
And I haven't been like, oh, well, it happened 3 years ago. It should be fine. No. I'm like, actually, no. I'm actually still not okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's I'm okay with that, actually, because I know that that's a slow process. And it actually probably changed me the most.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I had gone on this massive high. I thought I'd be the happiest of my ever, just picked David from The Bachelorette. I was excited about the future, and then all of a sudden I'm reminded of something and then sort of straight back to the real reality of my life and what happens so quickly, I guess. Not just in First Nations communities, but families in general, obviously. Like things can just change. And that reminder is just so jarring sometimes.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was like, that it actually changed me as a person. And I have thought, oh, I need to get back to that Brooke and I need to get that back. I'm like, I'm actually not that Brooke anymore.
No, things change you.
Yeah.
It's like heartbreak in a relationship.
Oh,
that changes how you love. If somebody hurts you in a relationship, it immediately changes how you love.
Yeah.
And how you experience love and the doubts. But when I think about grief, I always think of obviously my brother. And I think the process of that, the severity of somebody's actions being so cruel. The hard thing about this scenario is that I didn't allow it to be real. The experience of having a brother murdered, I always felt like it was never real. It was like something that happened to me that I just shut off, never ever dealt with, and only recently has it become less numb. And I put his photo next to my bed a few months ago, and as a reminder, you know, of him and his life. And it was the last photo we took together. It was me, him, and my dad. And I put it in black and white, and my partner said, "Why is it in black and white? You need to give him color, give him life," you know. And so I ended up reprinting it in color, and I haven't ever experienced grief like that, where like it's been so deep that you don't even want to look at it. Like before that moment, I couldn't look at photos of him. I couldn't really talk about him or say his name. Like, it was too hard to go there. And as soon as a memory would come up, or I'd get flashbacks to his body, you know, days before the funeral, I would just shut it out. It was like I just jumped that hurdle and leave it. And that's how I knew that grief was way too hard to even like connect with, you know. It's like too hard, and I'm just going to push it down. But recently, with a bit of justice came a bit of acknowledging, you know, the severity, but the reality of what happened. And I think that justice has allowed me to be more open to working on that grief. It's still something, it's like 2 years on.
Well, is it like a closure? You know? Like, is it like a...
It's closure to the fact that I don't need to worry about somebody paying the price. They are paying the price now. It's never enough, and it will never be enough, but they are paying for what they did. That little bit of justice has given me, I don't know, a sense of connection to
being
healing.
Able to now, to heal. Like it's like a acknowledgement. It's like a invitation or an acceptance. Like you're like,
I don't need to worry about what
now.
happened. It's more about now focusing on healing.
Yeah.
You know, this particular grief will stay with me forever, but I can do things to combat it and make sure that it doesn't become like a barrier to my mental health or success.
Yeah, I feel...
Because that's what it can be.
100%. And I see that actually quite often in the young girls that I work with, it being something that stops them from doing something and stops them from believing in themselves. And I guess, you know, I was that little girl once upon a time, you know, experiencing grief in the Aboriginal community. You experience it at such a young age, don't you reckon?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
You're going to funerals when you're really young.
Yep.
I was lucky. I say that I was lucky, but my fucking first funeral was my mum's. That was really hard. I didn't even know how funerals worked or run or, you know, writing a eulogy when you're 11 years, not eulogy, but writing, it's eulogy, right? Like when you're 11 years old. Yeah, it's like such a fucking surreal moment. But now the young girls that I'm working with are doing similar things. And I guess like I'm really lucky that I've got the skills now to be able to help and support them. And it's such a sort of full circle moment. But I just think, you know, grief has affected my life so much and I really don't want it to affect theirs. But at the same time, I know that they'll be stronger for it in some ways because I was myself. And I think, you know, if you look at the sort of light at the end of the tunnel or, you know, look at the slightest optimism and hope that an experience will either make you stronger or make you learn something.
You know what I say?
Yeah.
People say you win or you lose. No, you win or you learn.
You win or you learn. I agree.
You win or you learn.
Because I will choose not to lose.
The losing isn't even a thing. Like, yes, it is a thing in terms, like, okay, I hate when I say it's not a thing and then I go, yes, it is a thing. What I mean is every failure in quotations, or everything that isn't meant for us is a learning. Yes, a setback is a learning experience. And I've learnt, I think that's the best piece of advice that I've ever been given. You either win or you learn. Because like losing isn't a thing.
Yeah. And I think you've built that, obviously. You know, you've built that resilience. Yeah. And I think that's what I'm worried about young kids these days is that they haven't had time to build that resilience. Like, you know, phones have created this stimulation constantly that they're getting this like really big dopamine hit, you know, that they're not being able to self-soothe, self-manage. As soon as their phones are out of sight, out of mind, they're in the real world pretty much now and they don't know how to deal with that. And I think it's really affecting our young people like overall. And I think when it comes to grief and our young people, especially the girls that I work with, the self-manage and the self-soothing is their phones and technology. and that's not realistic.
No.
And, you know, they're not seeing things or useful information around grief. They don't know what grief is. And so, you know, if you're just dealing with this like shock factor of losing someone, you go and do the sorry business, you mourn. It doesn't just end there. Like I think, you know, people think, oh, so you do sorry business and you stay there until you're healed. It's not the case.
Yeah.
You stay there until you feel like you can properly move on in life, I guess, in a way where you function, you know, and you allow that time. That's what that time is for.
Yeah.
Which we are lucky that we give our kids the opportunity to do that. But I guess this documentary that I had the pleasure of, you know, moderating a Q&A for was just so realistic to the rawness of young girls moving, you know, away from home, which I feel was myself, and wanting to pursue a dream, but then sorry business and grief pulling them back to community and not being able to, you know, fully suspend into their pursuits of, you know, pursuing their dream kind of thing. Do you get what I mean? It being a barrier.
Yeah.
And I know that sorry business is so important, but at the same time, I do feel like sometimes we have to understand that it can pull back too far.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
You know what's equally as important? Self-preservation.
Yes.
Self-preservation.
That's the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
That's the other side.
100%.
Yeah.
And there's a balance there of being a part of ceremony and culture and understanding sorry business and supporting family, but also don't do it to the detriment of your own mental health. If you're not in a position, self-preserve.
Yeah, I agree.
It's super important. But
that's one great tip. So I guess we've spoken a little bit about our experiences with grief and then what we, you know, how we feel it and what it kind of can look like, I guess. What are some techniques or strategies or advice even you would give to someone who is going on that journey of, you know, experiencing grief, sorry business, or I guess wants to know what to expect in a way?
I think it's unique to everyone's experience, and it depends where you're at in life with what resources or what you're capable of doing. But I know that there's been different stages of my evolution in terms of my life, where I've been at different points in my life where I've been able to handle certain things. Like when I was younger, I obviously went to a lot of funerals, and even
how many funerals do you reckon you've been to? Just a number, just to throw it out there.
Probably around 30.
Fuck, that's a lot. That is a lot.
30.
And you're not even 30 yet.
Yeah.
That's one a year.
Yeah. I've been to a lot.
But you wouldn't... And what's the earliest age that you went to a funeral, do you reckon?
It would have been when I was about 7.
Yeah, wow.
6 or 7. 6, I think... I went to one before I went to foster care, and then the rest have been after foster care.
So between the ages of 7 and 30, you've gone to roughly around 30 funerals.
I want to say around 20. I think like 20, 25.
So one or two people a year, pretty much.
Yeah. Like I've had
people don't
uncles,
lose
cousins.
that many people.
No, people don't go to that in their lifetime.
Exactly. I'm just putting it in perspective because our listeners will probably listen and be like, I've not been to a funeral ever, or I've not been to a funeral in 5 years.
Yeah.
And we're losing family members every year, even every 6 months.
Yeah. It's
that's a reality check.
It's the harsh reality of being a First Nations person is that in this country, like we lose a lot. We see a lot more than in terms of things that affect our mental health. I feel like we see way more,
horrible shit.
Yeah, tough stuff to consume. But I also want to say, this has been a tough episode, and this has obviously been a heavy one to chat about. So, if anyone is listening and they want to, connect with someone, there's a really great hotline for Mob. It's 13 Yarn, and it's a part of Lifeline. It's a whole own department where there are First Nations callers who can chat you through any experience that you want to yarn to them about. So, reach out if you want to chat with them.
They listen non-judgmentally, non-biased. But if you're not First Nations, I guess, Lifeline is a really great hotline as well to call, 13 11 14. We'll put it in the show notes if you need some more resources and some other lines if you need. But no, I agree. I guess, my advice would be with grief is, again, it's a very different experience for anyone.
Yeah.
Is to take it slow. It's, I know that's so simple, but it's to not have an expectation on what it should look like and what your healing should look like, and to, I guess, in the moments when you are feeling, I guess, a bit sad and you're like, oh, this must, you maybe be more aware of those moments that you are a little bit sad, because I do, and I feel like, oh, I really miss my mum today. And I just I don't dwell in it, but I sit in it for a little bit.
Yeah,
and I
feel
think,
it.
Yeah,
Feel
I
it.
feel it, and I will have a little cry. I'll look at a photo of her. I'll burn a little candle.
Yeah.
I'll just, have that little moment, because I think that it's not going to, it takes maybe, 20 minutes out of my day to feel
And
that.
that's a healthy way to do it.
And, it's funny because in acting, it's like the emotions don't take you, you take them. And I think that's really powerful, that if you do have an emotion that comes, you get to choose whether you take it or leave it. And I feel like that's really important.
Yeah.
But I choose to take it every time, because I think taking that, it doesn't feel like it's going to cost me. If anything, it's going to, make me feel a little shitty for a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm going to give it a time to feel shitty. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to feel shitty for a week, because that's not going to be healthy. And I guess this is a very pragmatic way of looking at it at some points as well. But yeah, like taking the emotion, that rush of emotion, letting it happen, feel it, sit in it, reflect on it, and then say, okay, I've given it enough time now. I can get on with my day. And if it comes up again, let it. But then if it keeps coming up, being aware of that also. Because if you're feeling sad for 1 week, 2 weeks, feeling sad more than 2 weeks, maybe you need to go see someone, or maybe you need to talk to someone. Maybe you need to reach out and actually ask for some support. And I think that self-awareness is really important to your grief. Learning how to grieve. There's a great resource. I think it's also out there. This is a book I read, and it's actually How to Grieve it's a little yellow book. I'll find it.
Pop it in the show notes. That's all we have time for today. If anything that we've spoken about has affected you and you want to talk to someone, make sure you reach out. We will pop some resources in the show notes. But if you love what you hear on our pod, make sure you leave a little review and give us a rating.
Yeah, if you want us to cover anything else on the pod, reach out via our socials. My handle is at brooke.blurton and Maddie's handle is at It's Maddie Mills. And we'll see you next week.
Catch ya.
Bye.